I thought I had a perfect childhood. Turns out it was just a perfectly quiet kind of damage. They never yelled. They never hit me. But they taught me how to disappear with a smile. You know what's wild? How it takes you 30 years to realize the people who loved you also built the walls that trapped you. This isn't a story about abuse. It's a story about silence, about looking in the mirror at 33 and not recognizing the person staring back. Because that's what happens. When you grow up being praised for being polite, rewarded for being quiet, and trained to chase approval like your life depends on it. For the longest time, I thought I was just anxious, just a people pleaser, just someone who liked keeping the peace. But really, I was someone who was never allowed to just be. I used to think I had a good childhood. No abuse, no screaming matches, no divorce, just birthdays with balloons, Sunday dinners with the whole family, smiles for the camera, and hugs that smelled like home. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. Dad always paid the bills. Mom made sure our clothes were folded with lavender fabric softener. And if someone had asked me at 25, I would have sworn I had a picture-perfect upbringing. But something happens when you hit your 30s. You stop surviving, and you start remembering. Not the loud things, the quiet ones. Like how I learned to watch every word I said at dinner, just in case my dad gave me that look. The one where he didn't yell. He just tightened his jaw and the whole table fell silent. Or how my mom would fix her makeup 3 times before a simple grocery run. She'd say, "We don't want people to think we don't take care of ourselves." She said it with a smile. I absorbed it like gospel, and slowly, without even realizing, I learned to smile through discomfort. To people please like my worth depended on it. To shapeshift depending on who was in the room. Because in our house, being seen a certain way was more important than being okay. I didn't know it back then, but I was growing up in a place where image was everything, and authenticity was quietly punished. There were no lectures, no open threats, just silence, cold, and the occasional disappointed glance that made your stomach drop. I thought this was normal. In fact, I thought it was good parenting, because I was told I was well-behaved, polite, presentable. But no one told me I was allowed to feel overwhelmed, or that I could say no without explaining, or that love didn't always have to be earned with perfection. Now, in my 30s, I'm unlearning all of it, bit by bit. Like the way I reflexively apologize when I walk into a room, or how I can't relax at a party unless I know I'm dressed right, or why I feel guilty when I sit still for too long. These aren't random personality quirks, they're scars from a childhood that looked perfect on the outside, but taught me to always perform. And when I trace those lines back, they lead to 2 people who genuinely loved me, but who also never dealt with their own pain, who passed down their fears like family heirlooms, pressed them into my hands with good intentions, not knowing they were handing me weights I'd carry for decades. It's not about blame. I need to say that clearly. This story isn't a hit piece on my parents. They didn't drink or beat me. They came to every school play, and I never doubted their love. But even good parents can raise anxious children when they've never been taught how to sit with their own pain. Even homes filled with kindness can also be filled with quiet conditioning that teaches you to shrink, to hide, to twist yourself into someone else's version of enough. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. I see how many of my fears didn't start with me. They were planted slowly, subtly, by people who didn't know better. And for the first time, I'm ready to stop watering them. The older I got, the more I realized I didn't know who I was when no one was watching. I was always playing a role, the respectable child, the high achiever, the easy one, because that's what was expected of me, not through words, but through sighs, through glances, through praise that only came when I was quiet, composed, and polished. When I was a kid, I thought that was love. But now I know it was approval, and those are not the same thing. I remember one Thanksgiving. I must have been 10. I had a joke I really wanted to tell. It was silly, something I'd heard at school, but I was so proud of how I'd memorized the punchline. I waited for the perfect moment, right as everyone was finishing dessert. And I told it. No one laughed. My dad blinked, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Maybe keep the dumb jokes at school." I laughed along with him. Everyone else chuckled. I smiled, like I wasn't bleeding inside. That night, I remember looking in the mirror and whispering to myself, "Don't speak unless it's smart." Got it. And that became my rule. I didn't tell jokes after that. I didn't speak unless I rehearsed the sentence first in my head. I learned how to become the perfect version of me for them. But the cost? I lost touch with the real me. I became someone who checked mirrors obsessively before leaving the house, who couldn't eat in front of strangers because what if I'm messy, who replayed every conversation on a loop, terrified I'd said the wrong thing. And I didn't question it, because no one ever told me this was wrong. No one ever told me this was trauma. I thought trauma meant bruises, screaming, hospitals, not perfectly folded napkins, and being told that crying over nothing was dramatic. Not being told, "Fix your face, people are watching," or being asked, "Why would you wear that?" with a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. That's the thing about subtle emotional damage. It's easy to miss when you're living it. It becomes normal. And then you grow up, and you realize you've built your whole life trying to outrun a mirror. I avoided vulnerability because I was taught it looked weak. I avoided therapy because we're not that kind of family. I stayed in relationships that made me feel small, because small felt familiar. I remember one night in my early 30s, I was out with friends, real friends. Not the curated brunch group I usually clung to. They were laughing loudly, unapologetically. One of them spilled wine and just laughed. Not embarrassed. Not worried someone would judge. Just human. And I realized I had never laughed like that. Not freely, not fully. Because somewhere along the way, I learned that being too much would get me shut down. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my parents. This was about how deeply I had internalized their fears, their image obsession, their silence. And I wasn't angry at first, I was devastated. Because how many parts of me had I killed off to survive in a house that didn't know how to hold real feelings? How many dreams did I never chase? Because I was afraid they wouldn't look good on paper. How much joy had I lost while trying to be just right? The betrayal wasn't just that they raised me to care too much about what people think, it was that they made me believe. That was love. It started with a question I couldn't answer. Someone asked me, "What do you actually like?" And I froze. Not because it was a trick question, but because I didn't know. What music do I actually enjoy when no one's judging my playlist? What do I want to wear when no one's commenting on how professional I look? What's my favorite way to spend a Sunday when I'm not trying to prove I'm productive? I didn't know. And that terrified me more than any argument I've ever had. I had become a ghost in my own body, performing routines I never questioned, chasing approval I didn't even want anymore. Because deep down, beneath the compliments and checklists and curated versions of myself, I was exhausted. Not just tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away after a vacation. The kind that comes from carrying a version of yourself that isn't real, for decades. I remember sitting in my apartment one night. Everything was quiet. The dishes were done. Emails answered. Laundry folded. Everything looked perfect. And I just sat there, staring at the wall. No TV, no music, no distractions. And in that silence, something cracked. It started with a lump in my throat. Then came the tears, hot and unexpected. And suddenly, I was sobbing. Not a pretty cry. Not the kind you do in front of people to look vulnerable but composed. This was ugly, raw, guttural. I cried for the kid who never got to make a mess, for the teenager who learned to hide instead of speak, for the adult who thought being likable was the same thing as being loved. And as I curled into myself on that couch, chest heaving like I couldn't breathe, I realized I didn't miss my parents. I missed what I could have been if they had just let me be me. That broke something in me. Because until that moment, I had always made excuses. They did their best. They had it worse growing up. They didn't mean to hurt me. And maybe all of that is true. But the pain, it's still real. and it deserves to exist. I think that's the moment I stopped trying to protect them from their own parenting, stopped wrapping my pain in disclaimers, stopped minimizing how much it shaped me. Because here's the truth no one told me. You can love someone and still acknowledge the damage they caused. You can honor their intentions while still holding them accountable for the outcomes. And when I finally let myself feel that, fully, without guilt, it didn't make me bitter. It made me free. That night, I picked up my phone. I scrolled through old family photos, smiling faces, holiday dinners, vacations where everything looked so happy. And I whispered to the kid in those pictures, "I'm sorry they didn't see the real you, but I do. And from now on, I've got you." I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone out. I didn't write a long emotional letter. I just started making different choices. Quiet ones. Powerful ones. I started saying no more often. No to plans I didn't want. No to opinions that weren't asked for. No to the guilt that used to follow me everywhere like a second shadow. At first, it felt wrong. Almost rebellious. The first time I told someone, "I don't really like that, actually," my chest tightened, like I was waiting for a slap on the wrist that never came. I was shocked at the silence that followed, how nothing exploded. And that's when I realized most of the fear I carried wasn't about the world. It was about ghosts from my past, rules I never agreed to, but obeyed anyway. So I started breaking them, one by one. I wore clothes that felt like me, not what my mom would have called tasteful. I let my laugh be loud again, awkward and unfiltered and joyful. I made art without needing it to be good. I made mistakes and didn't spiral from shame. I let people see the messy, weird, wonderful parts of me I'd kept hidden for so long. And you know what? The world didn't fall apart. In fact, it got better. Because for the first time, I wasn't surrounded by people who liked the version of me I projected. I was surrounded by people who liked me. One of them even said, "You feel like someone who's awake." And I cried, because I'd spent most of my life sleepwalking in someone else's dream. I used to think healing would look like confrontation, like finally standing in front of my parents and giving them a speech so powerful it would change everything. But that day never came, and now I don't need it to. Because healing didn't come from them. It came from me. From the nights I held myself together. From the mornings I chose not to shrink. From the boundaries I drew, not in anger, but in love for myself. My parents still call sometimes. They ask how I'm doing. They don't know this version of me. And that's okay. I don't show them everything anymore. Because not everyone deserves access to your peace. I stopped expecting an apology. I stopped needing validation. And somewhere along the way, I stopped performing. This quiet, grounded, gentle version of me is the truest revenge I'll ever get. Because they raised a kid too afraid to speak. And that kid grew up to speak for themselves without asking for permission. Because they tried to mold me into perfect. And I chose to be real. Some people think closure comes with an apology. With someone crying, begging for forgiveness. With a hug, maybe. A dramatic reunion. Like in the movies. But my closure came in a much quieter moment. I was sitting on my back porch, cup of tea in hand, watching the sun melt into the sky. No noise, no rush. Just the sound of my own breathing. Steady, present, whole. And I thought, this is peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was no longer waiting for someone else to set me free. I had already done it. The truth is, my parents never changed. They still say things like, "You've always been so serious. You overthink everything." And maybe I do, but I'd rather overthink than underfeel. I'd rather be too sensitive than too silent. I used to want to go back, to rewrite everything, to be born in a house where softness was safe, where honesty wasn't mistaken for disrespect. But now I look at that scared kid I used to be, the one who learned to earn love by hiding, and I say, you made it. You made it through the silence, through the pressure, through the years of wondering if being yourself was a liability. You made it into a world where you could finally choose love that doesn't come with conditions. So no, I don't need revenge. I don't need to show them. The most powerful thing I ever did was walk away. Without bitterness, without begging, just quiet, graceful, irreversible distance. And if you're watching this and you feel like you're drowning in the weight of someone else's expectations, I want you to hear me loud and clear. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that makes them comfortable. You don't have to keep playing a role just because they wrote the script. You can choose you. And that choice, it's not selfish. It's sacred. They gave me a mask to wear, but I was never the one ashamed. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever realized too late that your perfect childhood wasn't actually perfect at all? What was your moment of awakening, the one that changed how you saw your entire upbringing? Share your story in the comments. I'll be reading them all.